The station, called Oriole Spire, floated in the darkness between stars like a city made of glass and light. It was the heart of the Galactic Council, where 312 species came together to argue, trade, and decide the fate of civilizations. Some of those species had traveled the stars for 10,000 years. Some had built empires that stretched across entire arms of the galaxy. And then there were the humans, who had discovered faster-than-light travel only 40 years ago, and still smelled like the dirt of their single blue world. Ambassador Yoon Hana stood at the viewport of her small quarters aboard the station, and looked out at the endless black. She was 43 years old, slim, with dark hair pulled back tight, and calm brown eyes that rarely showed what she was thinking. She had spent 5 years living among aliens, learning their languages, studying their politics, eating their food even when it made her sick. She had earned the respect of several delegates through patience and quiet intelligence. Tomorrow, she would walk into the Great Council chamber and present a proposal that could change everything for her species. Her assistant, a young officer named Cha Miso, knocked and entered. "The Fioni delegate wants to see you again before the session," Miso said. Hana nodded. "Tell Olin Shai I will meet him in the East Garden in 1 hour." She returned to her notes. The proposal was simple in concept, but enormous in meaning. A mutual defense and trade pact that would raise humanity from Tier 4 status, which was barely above animals in the Council's ranking system, to Tier 2. It would give Earth a real voice. It would give humans the right to settle beyond their own small corner of space. She had spent 2 years writing it, and every word had been chosen with care. What Hana did not know, and could not have known, was that her proposal had already been read by someone who had no intention of letting it reach the chamber floor. High Speaker Gorath Vel sat in his private chambers, 3 levels above, surrounded by advisors from 4 loyalist species. Gorath was Mordian, tall and broad, with gray skin that looked like carved stone, and 4 eyes that moved independently of each other. He had led the council for 60 years, and in that time he had crushed rebellions, silenced dissent, and maintained the old order with an iron grip. "The humans grow too fast," Gorath said, his deep voice filling the room. 40 years ago they were burning fossil fuels on a single planet. Now they field a fleet of 800 warships. In another 40 years, how many will they have? 80,000. One of his advisors, a thin creature from the Valesi delegation, clicked its teeth nervously. "They are still small, High Speaker. Their fleet is nothing compared to ours." "Today," Gorath replied, "today it is nothing." He turned all 4 eyes toward the viewport. "I have studied these creatures. They do not grow like other species. They do not climb slowly. They leap, they fall, they get up and leap again, higher each time. If we allow this proposal to pass, we give them legitimacy. We give them allies. We give them time. And time is the one thing we cannot afford to give them." The decision was made that night. The proposal would not simply be rejected. The humans would be sent a message so clear that no minor species would ever dare to challenge the Council's authority again. The next morning, the great chamber was full. Delegates from hundreds of worlds filled the curved rows of seats that rose like a stadium around the central platform. Light poured down from a crystal ceiling that showed the stars outside. It was beautiful and intimidating, and that was exactly the point. Hana walked to the podium with steady steps. Her security detail, 4 soldiers in dress uniforms, stood behind her at respectful distance. She placed her hands on the podium, looked up at the thousands of alien faces watching her, and began to speak. Her voice was calm and clear. She spoke about cooperation. She spoke about the benefits of trade and shared defense. She spoke about humanity's desire not to conquer or compete, but to contribute. She was halfway through her address when Gorath Vel stood from his elevated seat and raised one massive hand. "Enough," he said. The chamber went silent. Hana stopped speaking and looked up at him. The Council has reviewed humanity's petition, Gorath continued, his voice booming through the hall. Furthermore, the Council has received intelligence that Earth's government has been conducting espionage operations against sovereign Council species. Humanity is hereby classified as a hostile entity. Hana blinked once. She knew the espionage charges were lies. She kept her composure and spoke carefully. High Speaker, these accusations are without evidence. I formally request arbitration under Council law. Denied, Gorath said. Council law applies to Council members. You are not members. You are guests, and your welcome has ended. Hana nodded slowly. She gathered her notes, turned, and gestured for her team to follow her toward the exit. She had trained herself for this kind of failure. She would return to Earth, regroup, and try again through back channels. But the doors did not open. Mordian enforcers in full combat armor stood, blocking every exit. 20 of them, armed with plasma rifles. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Several delegates stood from their seats. Olan Shai, the Fioni delegate, shouted something in his own language and tried to rush forward, but 2 guards grabbed him and held him back. Hana turned back to face Gorath. For the first time, something shifted in her calm eyes. Not fear, understanding. So this is what you are, she said quietly. Gorath looked down at her from his seat and gave a small nod to the enforcer captain. The plasma fire was brief. Hana and her 4 soldiers fell on the chamber floor in front of 300 species. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. Several delegates looked away. Others stared in open horror. Gorath stood and addressed the chamber. Let the younger races understand. The Council's authority is not negotiable. But in the chaos, one thing had escaped. A tiny human comm drone, no bigger than a fist, had launched from Hana's wrist device the instant the doors had sealed. It was fast and it was quiet. And by the time anyone thought to look for it, it was already gone, burning through space toward the nearest human relay station, carrying a recording of everything that had just happened. 72 hours later, that recording played on every screen in United Earth Command. Generals, admirals, and politicians watched in silence as Hana fell. When it ended, Supreme Commander Bake Jisok stood from his chair. His face showed nothing. His voice was flat and cold. Wake the protocol, he said. And the silence that followed was not grief. It was something far more dangerous. It was the sound of a species deciding, together and all at once, that mercy was no longer on the table. For 3 days, the galaxy heard nothing from Earth. Every human ship in every sector recalled to preset coordinates. Embassies closed overnight. Trade convoys stopped mid-route, turned around, and vanished into deep space. Communication channels that had been active for decades went dark, one by one, like lights turning off in a building before a storm. At first, the Council celebrated. On the Oriel Spire, Gorath Vel addressed the delegates with satisfaction. As expected, he said, the humans have retreated. They understand now what happens to those who overstep their place. Let this be remembered. Several loyalist species applauded. Drinks were poured. Speeches were made about the strength of the old order and the wisdom of the High Speaker. But not everyone was celebrating. Olan Shai, the Fioni delegate, sat alone in his quarters and sent message after message to Earth's relay stations. None were answered. He contacted human traders he had known for years. Silence. He reached out to Hana's diplomatic staff on other stations. Their offices were empty, cleaned out, as if they had never existed. Olan Shai was old enough to know what silence meant. When a prey animal goes quiet, it is hiding. When a predator goes quiet, it is hunting. On Earth, behind walls of encryption that no alien intelligence service had ever cracked, the truth was very different from what the Council imagined. Supreme Commander Baek Ji-sok stood in the command center of the United Defense Force, buried deep beneath a mountain range that had no name on any public map. Around him, hundreds of officers worked at their stations, with a focus that was almost frightening. No one raised their voice. No one panicked. They had trained for this. Not this exact scenario, but something like it. Humanity had always known that the galaxy might one day decide to crush them, and they had prepared accordingly. The plan was called Annihilation Protoc. It had been written in the first decade after first contact, by a team of strategists who asked one simple question: if every hand in the galaxy turns against us, how do we survive? The answer they came up with was not defensive. It was not about building walls or hiding behind Earth's solar defenses. It was about making the cost of attacking humanity so catastrophic, so absolute, that no rational civilization would ever consider it. And now someone had considered it. And now the protocol was awake. No Do-yoon, the head of Earth's intelligence division, entered the command center with a datapad and a face that showed no emotion. Do-yoon was 51, thin, with gray at his temples, and the kind of eyes that looked like they were always reading something invisible. He had spent 20 years building an intelligence network that the Council did not know existed. We have full maps of every Council shipyard, supply depot, and communication relay in 6 sectors, Do-yoon reported. Fleet positions are current within 4 hours. We know where their ships are, how many they have, and how fast they can mobilize. Jisek looked at him. How did they never catch us? Do-yoon allowed himself the smallest smile. They never looked. To them, we were children playing in the dirt. You do not check if children are reading your mail. In orbit above Earth, Captain Kwon Tae-ho stood on the bridge of the UES Iron Wake and watched the fleet assemble. The Iron Wake was a heavy cruiser, black-hulled and angular, built for speed and violence in equal measure. Around it, hundreds of ships were forming up, emerging from hidden docks in asteroid fields, from stations disguised as mining platforms, from shipyards on the dark side of moons that the Council had never bothered to scan. The fleet was not large by galactic standards. 3,000 warships against an empire of millions. But these ships were different. Humans had never had the raw resources of the elder species. They could not build 10,000 battleships out of rare metals mined from 100 worlds. So instead, they had focused on making every single ship as dangerous as possible. Shin Yuna, the Iron Wake's chief tactical officer, stepped up beside Tae-ho with a tablet showing fleet readiness reports. Yuna was 35, sharp-featured, with short black hair and a reputation for creative solutions to impossible problems. In war games, she had once defeated a simulated fleet 3 times her size by using a planet's own moon as a weapon. All battle groups report ready, she said. Drone carriers are loaded. Stealth ships are in position at forward staging points, and the Biol platforms, she paused. They confirm green across all nodes. Tae-ho nodded but said nothing about Biol. Even here, on his own bridge, he did not speak that name carelessly. Project Biol was the deepest secret Earth possessed, so classified that most admirals knew nothing more than its name. He walked to a quiet corner of the bridge, where a small screen displayed a list of names. It was a memorial list, updated in real time, of every human who had died in the service of Earth's expansion into the galaxy. At the top, freshly added, was a name he knew well. Yoon Hana, killed in the line of duty. He had met her once, 3 years ago, at a reception on Earth before she left for the Ariel Spire. She had been funny and warm and frighteningly smart, and she had told him over a glass of wine that she believed the galaxy could be better than it was. that the Council's system of ranked species was cruel and outdated, and that humanity could help change it, not through force, but through example. He touched the screen where her name glowed softly. "We tried it your way," he said quietly. "Now we try mine." Across the galaxy, something else was happening. On dozens of worlds belonging to minor species, those civilizations that the Council had kept under its boot for centuries, encrypted data packets began arriving through channels that could not be traced. The packets contained detailed intelligence about Council fleet positions, military installations, and supply routes. Attached to each packet was a short message in simple galactic common language. It read, "Stay clear of the following coordinates. What comes next is not your war." Some species deleted the messages in fear. Others read them carefully and began quietly moving their people away from Council military bases. A few, bolder than the rest, began to hope. On the 72nd hour of silence, every Council communication relay in 3 sectors went dead at the same moment. It was as if someone had reached out and pinched shut every signal line across a region of space larger than most species' entire territories. The Council's communication officers scrambled to find the cause. Before they could, a single transmission broke through on the emergency frequency. The one channel that every species monitored, the one that was only used for galaxy-level threats. First, it played a recording. The delegates who were listening recognized it immediately. It was the sound of plasma fire in the Great Chamber. It was the sound of Hana falling. It was the sound of Gorath Fell's voice declaring his authority over life and death. When the recording ended, a new voice spoke. It was calm, measured, and human. "This is Captain Quan Teho of the United Earth ship Iron Wake, speaking on behalf of the human species. 72 hours ago, your Council murdered our ambassador and her team in cold blood during a diplomatic summit. You were warned, many times and by many voices, about what we are. You did not listen. You will listen now." A pause. Then, "We are coming." The transmission ended, and across the galaxy, for the first time in 10,000 years of Council rule, the elder species felt something they had forgotten was possible. The war began on 17 fronts at the same time, and it began with a violence that the galaxy had not seen in living memory. The Council had expected skirmishes. They had expected angry humans throwing themselves at border stations in a fit of grief, easy to contain, easy to crush. What they got instead was a coordinated military campaign so precise and so overwhelming that entire command structures collapsed before they could respond. Captain Quan Teho led the main strike force himself. The target was the Mordian shipyard complex at Tassara, the largest military construction facility in Council space. 12 orbital platforms, each one the size of a small moon, where the Mordians built the warships that kept the galaxy in line. Destroying Tassara would not just hurt the Mordians, it would send a message to every species that had ever relied on Mordian warships for protection. That protection is gone now. The Iron Wake dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Tassara system, with 40 warships and 200 drone carriers behind it. The Mordians detected them immediately and scrambled a defense fleet. Admiral Tessic Rue, a veteran commander with 100 years of experience, took personal command and brought 300 warships to meet the human force. Tessic was not a fool. He had studied the reports from the few minor species who had fought humans before, small border conflicts that the Council had barely noticed. He knew humans were aggressive and adaptable, but 300 warships against 40 should have been simple mathematics. It was not. The first thing Teho did was release the drones. Each carrier held 5,000 autonomous combat drones, small and fast, and controlled by artificial intelligence that could think and react faster than any living pilot. Within minutes, 1,000,000 drones filled the space between the two fleets like a swarm of metal insects. And they did not behave like any weapon Tessic had ever encountered. They learned. In the first 30 seconds, the Mordian point defense guns destroyed thousands of them. In the next 30 seconds, the drones had analyzed the firing patterns and adapted. They came in waves that shifted and flowed around the defensive fire like water around stones. They targeted weapon systems with surgical accuracy, blinding ships and leaving them helpless. While Tessic's fleet struggled with the drones, Tejo brought his warships in on an angle that the Mordian tactical doctrine said was impossible. The Mordians fought in rigid formations, lines and columns that had worked for 1,000 years. The humans fought like a pack of wolves, circling, feinting, striking from unexpected directions, and then vanishing before the counterattack could land. Shin Yuna sat at her tactical station aboard the Iron Wake and conducted the battle like a musician conducting an orchestra. She had spent years studying Mordian tactics, and she knew their weaknesses better than they did. When a Mordian battleship formation turned to engage the human cruisers on the left flank, she redirected 3 drone swarms to hit their exposed engines from below. When Tessic tried to pull his fleet back into a defensive sphere, she used the Iron Wake's main guns to shatter 2 supply ships at the center of the formation, creating a field of debris that split the sphere in half. Then she did something that Tessic would later describe as the most terrifying tactical decision he had ever witnessed. Human ships equipped with gravitational tow systems grabbed chunks of the destroyed supply ships, some of them the size of buildings, and hurled them at high speed into the Mordian formation. The Mordians could shoot down missiles. They could dodge torpedoes. They could not dodge a 10,000-ton piece of their own ship coming at them at a fraction of light speed. The battle lasted 9 hours. When it was over, the 12 orbital platforms of Tessara were burning wreckage. Tessic Ru retreated with less than a third of his fleet, many of his remaining ships damaged and limping. He opened a secure channel to Gorath Vel and said 5 words that would echo through Council history. "These are not children, Speaker." But Tessara was only one front. Across Council space, human fleets struck with the same coordinated precision. Supply depots were destroyed. Communication hubs were disabled. Military stations were surrounded and given the choice to surrender or be dismantled. The attacks were brutal and efficient, but they shared one strange characteristic that confused every Council analyst who studied them. The humans were not targeting civilians. On 3 separate occasions, human warships held their fire when civilian transports crossed their attack paths. Even when doing so cost them tactical advantage. On a Mordian colony world, a human strike force destroyed the orbital defense platforms and the military base on the surface, but left the cities untouched. When a hospital ship from a neutral species strayed into a battle zone, 2 human destroyers broke formation to escort it to safety. This was not the behavior of a species bent on annihilation, something the Council had no framework to understand, because in 10,000 years of galactic politics, war had always meant total war. No Doyun's intelligence network operated behind the front lines with quiet efficiency. Sleeper assets that had been planted years ago activated across Council space. Information brokers who had been cultivated with patience and money began feeding real-time fleet data back to Earth. Automated surveillance systems hidden in communication relays woke up and started recording. The Council's military became transparent. Every order, every fleet movement, every supply request was intercepted and analyzed before it could be carried out. The minor species watched and waited. Many of them had lived under the Council's thumb for centuries, forced to pay tribute, forced to send ships for Council fleets, forbidden from developing their own military technology. Now they saw the impossible happening. They saw the youngest species in the galaxy tearing apart the oldest power structure anyone could remember. The Fionae were the first to act. Olin Shai addressed his people in a broadcast that reached every Fioni world, and said that the council had murdered a diplomat under a flag of peace, and that such a government deserved no loyalty. The Fioni formally withdrew from the council and declared neutrality. They opened their borders to refugees from the fighting, and offered humanitarian aid to any species that needed it. Others followed. The Tessari refused to send ships to the council fleet. The Olanki closed their borders. The Savathi, who had been council members for 8,000 years, published a formal condemnation of the assassination and called for Gorath Vel's resignation. Gorath did not resign. Instead, he called an emergency session and stood before the frightened delegates with the full force of his authority. "This is not a war we can afford to lose," he told them. "If the humans win, the order that has kept this galaxy stable for 10,000 years will collapse. Every species in this chamber benefits from that order. Every species in this chamber has a duty to defend it." He proposed the Grand Fleet, a combined armada from every loyal council species, the largest military force ever assembled to meet the human advance and crush it in a single decisive battle. The vote passed with a large majority, driven by fear more than conviction. The Grand Fleet began to assemble. Ships poured in from 200 species. Battleships and cruisers and carriers and destroyers, 40,000 warships, gathering at a staging point deep in council territory. It was a force so large that its gravitational signature could be detected from light years away. It was meant to be the end of humanity's rebellion. When the intelligence reached the Iron Wake, Teho read the numbers in silence. 40,000 ships. His entire fleet, including reserves, numbered 6,000. Yuna stood beside him and looked at the same data. "Can we win against that?" she asked. Teho did not answer immediately. He reached into his console and pulled up a file that required 3 separate authorization codes to open. The file was marked with a single word in Korean. Byol. Star. He read its contents for the 100th time, then closed it and looked at Yuna with eyes that were steady and sure. "We will not need to fight all 40,000, he said. "We just need them to come to us." And across the dark expanse of space, the Grand Fleet began to move, carrying the hopes and fears of 300 species toward a battle that would decide the future of the galaxy. None of them understood what humanity had built in the solace of the last 10 years. And by the time they did understand, it would be far too late. Teho chose the place where he wanted to die or to win. It was called the Kessera Expanse, a vast stretch of empty space filled with thin clouds of gas and the cold remains of dead stars. It was far from any habitable world, far from any trade route, and far from help. It was the kind of place that most captains avoided because there was nothing there worth fighting over. That was exactly why Teho chose it. The human fleet arrived first. 6,000 ships spread out across a defensive formation that covered an area the size of a small solar system. From the outside, it looked like a desperate last stand. Ships positioned in clusters, too far apart to support each other properly, spread thin and waiting. Any competent admiral looking at that formation would see weakness. Teho was counting on that. The Grand Fleet arrived 12 hours later. Admiral Tessic Rue stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Mordian dreadnought Unbroken Will, and looked at the sensor display showing 40,000 ships under his command. He had been given this assignment not because Gorath Vel trusted him, but because he was the only commander in the council who had actually fought humans and survived. That experience had taught him 2 things. First, that humans were more dangerous than anyone believed. Second, that they never did anything without a reason. He looked at the human formation and felt cold. "They chose this place," he said to his officers. "They had weeks to run. They had the whole galaxy to hide in. They came here and waited for us. Why? No one had an answer. Around him, 200 different species admirals were sending messages demanding immediate attack. They had come with the largest fleet in galactic history, and they wanted to use it. Many of them had never fought a real battle. They saw 40,000 ships against 6,000, and they saw only the numbers. Tessic sent a fleet-wide order to advance slowly and maintain formation. Half the admirals ignored him. Battle groups from a dozen species surged forward, racing each other to be the first to engage the humans and claim the glory. The first shots were fired at extreme range. Human ships returned fire with precision, picking off the fastest attackers with long-range kinetic rounds that punched through shields like needles through cloth. But the sheer volume of the Grand Fleet pushed forward, and the human formation began to give ground. This was what the Council admirals wanted to see. The humans were retreating, the formation was breaking apart. Victory was coming. On the Iron Wake, Yuna tracked the enemy advance on her tactical display. They are entering the expanse. Forward elements are past the first marker. Second marker in 40 minutes at current speed. Tejo sat in his command chair and watched. His hands were still. His breathing was even. Around him, the bridge crew worked in focused silence. They knew what was coming, even if the details were above their clearance level. They trusted their captain because he had never lied to them, and because he had walked them through fire before. The Grand Fleet pushed deeper. The thin gas clouds of the expanse made long-range sensors unreliable, and the Council ships began to lose clear sightlines to each other. The rigid formations that were supposed to hold the multi-species fleet together started to stretch and bend. Tessic Rue ordered his ships to slow down and regroup, but the eager admirals kept pushing, pulling the fleet forward like a current dragging swimmers into deep water. Third marker, Yuna said. They are fully inside. Tejo stood. Activate Buell. The order went out through a secure channel that existed for this single purpose, a channel that had been built and tested and maintained in secret for over a decade. And across the Kasara expanse, something woke up. They had been hidden for 10 years. Thousands of platforms, each one small enough to be mistaken for a piece of space debris, scattered across the expanse in patterns that looked random, but were not. They had been placed one by one, carried by unmarked ships on missions that appeared to be nothing more than routine survey flights. No single person outside of the highest levels of Earth's command knew what they all did together. Each platform could generate a localized distortion in the fabric of space, a small bend in the geometry that faster-than-light engines needed to function. One platform could slow an FTL jump. 1,000, working together, could lock down an entire region of space so completely that nothing could enter or leave at faster-than-light speed. The Grand Fleet's FTL capability died in an instant. 40,000 ships suddenly found themselves unable to jump. Warning alarms screamed across bridges in 200 languages. Engineers ran diagnostics that came back with impossible readings. Navigators stared at instruments that told them space itself had changed around them. And then the second function activated. The platforms began broadcasting interference on every frequency the Council used for targeting, navigation, and communication. Sensor displays filled with noise. Targeting computers lost their locks. Ship-to-ship communication became a chaos of static and fragments. The Grand Fleet, the most powerful military force ever assembled, became 40,000 ships that could not see, could not talk to each other, and could not run. Tessic Rue stood on his bridge and felt the deck vibrate as his ship's systems fought against the interference. He closed all four of his eyes for a long moment. He had known it was a trap. He had felt it in his bones. And he had walked into it anyway, because the fleet was not his to command, not really. Not when 200 admirals from 200 species each thought they knew better. Tejo's voice came through on a frequency that somehow cut through the interference with perfect clarity. The humans had built Biol, Of course they knew how to talk through it. "Attention all council vessels. This is Captain Quan Tejo. Your fleet is locked inside an interdiction field. You cannot jump to FTL. Your sensors and communications are compromised. You are in every way that matters, trapped. I am offering you one chance. Power down your weapons, broadcast a surrender signal on frequency 770, and you will not be harmed. Your crews will be safe. Your ships will be returned after the war. This offer will not be repeated." For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, one by one, ships began to comply. Small frigates from minor species went first, their captains seeing no reason to die for a council that had never treated them as equals. Then larger ships followed, cruisers, carriers, even a few battleships from species that had joined the Grand Fleet only because they were afraid to refuse. But not everyone surrendered. The Mordian core fleet, 2,000 of the heaviest warships in the galaxy, powered up their weapons and turned toward the human position. Several other loyalist species did the same. Roughly 14,000 ships chose to fight. They fought blind. The interference turned every engagement into close-range chaos, where the council ships could barely tell friend from enemy. The humans, whose systems were designed to operate inside Biol's field, moved with perfect coordination. Drone swarms poured in from every direction, targeting engines and weapons with the same surgical precision they had shown at Tessera. Yuna commanded the drone operations from her station, her fingers moving across 3 screens at once, her eyes reading data faster than most computers could process it. She directed swarms around surrendered ships, protecting them from stray fire. She identified command ships and focused pressure on them, knowing that once a flagship fell, the ships under its command usually followed. A second human fleet, held in reserve outside the Expanse, jumped in behind the Grand Fleet and closed the physical trap that Biol had started. Now, the Council ships were caught between 2 forces with nowhere to go. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, roughly 26,000 Council ships had surrendered. 8,000 were disabled, but intact, their crews alive. 6,000 had managed to fight their way to the edges of the Expanse and escape into normal space. The rest were debris. Human losses were 900 ships. Heavy, but a fraction of what anyone had expected. Tessik Ru opened a private channel to the Iron Wake. His voice was tired and heavy with something that might have been respect. "You have won, Captain. What do you want?" Tejo leaned forward. "Tell your ships to stand down so that no one else has to die today. We will discuss terms later." Tessik gave the order. The last Mordian guns went silent. The Cassara Expanse, which had been filled with fire and light for hours, slowly went dark and quiet. Later that night, after the surrendered ships had been secured and the wounded were being treated, Olan Shai reached Tejo through a diplomatic channel. His voice was careful and a little afraid. "What does humanity intend now, Captain? What comes next?" Tejo looked out through the viewport at the vast field of silent ships. Somewhere out there, thousands of alien crews were sitting in the dark, waiting to learn their fate, wondering if the humans would do to them what the Council had done to Hana. "Justice," Tejo said, "not revenge. There is a difference, delegate, and the Council is about to learn it." The human fleet arrived at the Auriel Spire on a quiet morning, if morning meant anything in the endless dark between stars. 300 warships took position around the station, in a perfect sphere, their weapons powered but not aimed. They did not fire. They did not need to. The message was clear enough without a single shot. Inside the station, panic had been growing for days. Delegates packed their belongings and tried to book passage on any ship leaving the system. Staff members abandoned their posts. The corridors that had once been filled with the confident voices of galactic power were now hollow and echoing. The Council, which had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, was falling apart in real time. Gorath Vel sat alone in his chambers and watched the human ships through his viewport. He had not slept in 3 days. The reports from Kasara had been bad enough, but what came after was worse. Species were leaving the Council every hour. His allies were abandoning him. The Mordian homeworld had sent a message asking him to resign for the good of their people. He had not replied. He was still sitting there when the human diplomatic cruiser docked at the station's main port. Supreme Commander Bake Gisek walked through the corridors of the Ariel Spire with an escort of 12 soldiers in dress uniform. He was 60 years old, tall for a human, with a lined face and gray hair cut short. He walked at a steady pace, not fast, not slow, and he looked straight ahead. The aliens who saw him pass pressed themselves against the walls and stared. He entered the great council chamber. It had been cleaned. The floor where Hana had fallen was polished and spotless. The seats were mostly empty. A few dozen delegates had chosen to remain, either out of courage or curiosity, or because they had nowhere else to go. Olan Shai was there, sitting in the Fioni section with his hands folded. Tessik Ru was there too, standing at the back in a plain uniform, no longer an admiral, just a soldier, waiting to hear what came next. Gisek walked to the podium at the center of the chamber, the same podium where Hana had stood. He placed his hands on it, looked up at the scattered faces watching him, and was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was calm and carried easily through the chamber. 41 days ago, Ambassador Yoon Hana stood in this room and asked for partnership. She asked for a seat at a table where her people could contribute to something larger than themselves. She was answered with murder. He paused. I did not come here to do what was done to her. I did not come here to punish. I came here because the system that killed her was broken long before she walked into this room, and breaking it further would serve no one. He produced a document, physical paper in a galaxy of digital records, and placed it on the podium. These are the terms Earth proposes. We call them the Hana Accords. The terms were straightforward. First, the Galactic Council would be dissolved and replaced by a new body called the Galactic Assembly, where every species, from the oldest empire to the youngest spacefaring civilization, would hold equal representation and equal voting rights. Second, Gorath Vel and every official who had participated in or ordered the assassination of Ambassador Hana and her team would stand trial before an independent judiciary made up of judges from neutral species. Third, no species could be denied trade, travel, or the right to form alliances based on how old their civilization was or how powerful their military was. Fourth, a human peacekeeping force would be stationed at key points across the galaxy during the transition period, not as occupiers, but as guarantors that the new system would be given time to take root. Fifth, a permanent memorial to Yoon Hana and the 4 members of her team would stand in the assembly chamber for as long as the chamber existed. He finished reading the terms and looked up. These are not demands from a conqueror. They are an invitation. The same kind of invitation that Hana carried, offered in the same spirit. The difference is that this time, the species making the offer has the power to enforce it. We would rather not. We would rather you choose this freely. Olan Shai was the first to stand. The Fioni accept, he said simply. He looked at Gisiop with eyes that were wet and tired. She would have been proud of this. Others followed. The Tessari accepted. The Olanki accepted. The Sevathi, who had publicly condemned the assassination weeks earlier, accepted with a formal statement praising humanity's restraint. Within an hour, over 100 species had endorsed the accords. By the end of the day, the number passed 200. Gorath Vel was arrested quietly. 2 human soldiers and 2 Fioni officers went to his chambers and informed him that he was being taken into custody pending trial. He went without resistance, but without apology. At his tribunal, held 3 weeks later on a neutral station, he stood before judges from 7 species and defended his actions. "I did what was necessary to preserve order," he said. "The humans were a threat to the stability of this galaxy. History will prove me right." The lead judge, an elderly Sevathi, looked at him for a long time before responding. "You killed an unarmed woman who came to you with open hands. That is not order. That is fear." Gorath was sentenced to imprisonment for the rest of his natural life on a neutral world chosen by the tribunal. He was led from the courtroom in silence. Tessik Ru was offered a different path. In exchange for his cooperation in the military transition and his testimony at the tribunal, he was given amnesty. He accepted and spent the following months working with human officers to disarm and reorganize the former council fleets. One evening, aboard the Iron Wake, he sat across from Teho in the captain's small office, and shared a drink that humans called soju, and that Mordians found surprisingly tolerable. "I have fought wars for 100 years, Tessik said. "I have never seen a species fight the way you do. You had the power to destroy us, every ship, every world. You chose not to. I do not understand it." Teho took a slow drink. "That is what she was trying to explain to you, that day in the chamber. You just did not let her finish." Tessik looked at his glass and said nothing for a long time. When the war was officially over and the transition was underway, Teho returned to Earth. He had been away for 2 months, and the planet looked the same as it always did from orbit. Blue and green and white, impossibly beautiful against the black. He took a shuttle down to a small city on the coast, and drove a borrowed car to a quiet neighborhood where the trees were just beginning to show their autumn colors. Hana's family lived in a small house with a garden that her mother tended every day. Her mother was 70, small and straight-backed, with the same calm eyes her daughter had carried to the stars. Her younger brother, Yoon Jae-woo, was 28, a teacher, and he met Teho at the door with a face that was trying very hard to be composed. They sat in the living room. Teho placed a small box on the table and opened it. Inside was a medal, newly struck in silver and gold, bearing Hana's name and the words "for service beyond measure." "The assembly voted unanimously to honor her," Teho said. "Every species, even the ones who used to call us lesser." Hana's mother took the medal and held it carefully. She didn't cry. She looked at it for a while, then placed it on the shelf next to a photograph of Hana as a child, standing in this same garden, laughing at something outside the frame. Jae-woo walked Teho to the door when he left. The evening air was cool and smelled of the sea. "Was it worth it?" Jae-woo asked. "All of it. The war, the dying. Was it worth it?" Teho looked at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to show. Somewhere up there, on a station that had once been a place of cruelty and silence, a new assembly was meeting for the first time. Species that had never spoken to each other were sitting at the same table. Wrongs that had been ignored for centuries were being heard. It was messy and slow and imperfect, but it was real. "She wanted us to be part of something bigger," he said. "Now we are." Months later, the Galactic Assembly held its first full session in the renovated chamber of the Aureal Spire. The room had been rebuilt, the old hierarchical seating replaced with a circular arrangement where every delegate sat at the same level. At the center, where the podium had once stood, there was now an open floor, and at its edge stood a memorial carved from stone, brought from Earth. It bore the names of Yoon Hana and the 4 members of her team. Beneath the names, engraved in every language the galaxy knew, was a line from her unfinished speech, the words she had never been allowed to say, recovered from the comm drone that had carried her last moments across the stars. The inscription read, "We did not cross the stars to conquer. We crossed them because we believed, perhaps foolishly, perhaps stubbornly, that the universe is better when no one walks it alone." On a cool afternoon in the station's artificial daylight, a young Phione student walked through the chamber on a school trip. She was 12 years old and had never known the old council. To her, the assembly was simply how things were. She stopped in front of the memorial and read the words slowly, her lips moving. She reached out and touched the stone with the tips of her fingers. Then she turned and walked out into a galaxy that was, slowly and imperfectly, learning to believe the same thing.